a way, if you had time to have a look already at the report, so we are now a little bit jumping back to section 2.1 for some of the solutions, and then to the overall lessons learned to section 2.3. First, let me start with some of the solutions that we found addressing the key issues for the beneficiaries. And Costas already talked about the exogenous factors, the structure of the farm, and the operating context, as well as issues in relation to monitoring, reporting, and verification. And just in the previous discussion that we had about the exogenous factors, we already highlighted the importance of really robustly defining indicators that are sensitive to changes, so to reduce the risk of exogenous factors impacting on the results, on the measurement of the results. And we also picked up the issue of the record keeping, of drafting action plans that details the actions that have been done in case results are not achieved, that there is basically a kind of validation, verification that the efforts have been done with every reasonable effort to still get the payment. When it comes to the structure of the farm and the operating context, one of the solutions that applied in a number of the examples relates to, well, advisory support and support through experts. And that does not only relate to support during the implementation of the intervention, but also, for example, in the example in Austria on the result-based agri-environment scheme there, in terms of before a farmer would sign up to a result-based intervention, where experts would visit the farm and together with the farmer do an assessment of the farm, of the baseline, and do basically provide decision support in terms of ensuring that the farm fits with the scheme and that what's set up in terms of options from the scheme fits with the structure and the operating context of the farm. Other solutions here relate to payment sensitivity and modulation, that the payment differentiation is designed so that it addresses the structure of the farm in different operating contexts, with lower tier payments, for example, and also issues and solutions in relation to the flexibility of the contracts. For example, if operating contexts change during the course of the contract, that there is flexibility for the farm to adjust management activities that still deliver the results, and potentially also flexibility in terms of terminating the contract if there is no other solution. Then with respect to the monitoring, reporting, and verification, again, we talked already about the importance of indicators also being understandable and measurable by beneficiaries. So I think with a number of examples, the solutions here relate to a kind of active involvement of the beneficiaries, of the farmers, both in the monitoring itself, but also, as picked up earlier, also the involvement of the farmers in the selection of the verification experts to ensure that there are trusting relationships, and that the farmers have a say in that, who is coming on their field and doing the verification. And of course, transparency and compatibility with other data collection, and really to be mindful in terms of the use of farm data and the data that are collected. Valdis, the next slide, please. And then just to summarize some of the solutions addressing the risks from a perspective of the administrations. And the first point in terms of types of risk or key issues here relate to the trust between actors. So I think that relates back to what Costas had on his slides earlier with the increased risk of errors and also the reliance on other actors. And I think we talked about earlier already that trust, of course, is a key element of result-based intervention. There needs to be a certain level of trust between beneficiaries and administrations. But of course, it's also important to have on-spot controls to do on-spot checks of the verification done through farmers and experts. Hybrid systems address also the risk of errors and with the combination of action-based and result-based elements, and also to basically utilize data that are already collected, for example, as part of Ajax. Another important issue relates here to the administrative costs, to the transaction costs that are at least initially higher and when we implement result-based interventions. But what we've seen here also from the examples is clear reference to those kind of costs decreasing over time. So in a way, there is some kind of investment at the beginning, additional cost in setting up the system, but then over time, those kind of costs will decrease. Another issue was that there is more experience in action-based schemes and the need for gaining experience in administering result-based interventions, for example, through further pilots and capacity building measures, not only for farmers implementing the measures, but also basically for administrations administering the result-based interventions. And when it comes to the compatibility with the current CAP or the national rules, what we've seen here as a kind of standard solution in a way is that payments basically are calculated based on an indicative set of actions as a kind of standard approach in terms of quantifying payments, and also then in terms of approaches linking levels of results to payments either per hectare or per livestock units when it's about animal welfare, or in specifically justified cases also lump sums. Let's move on maybe to some of the to the lessons learned. Generally speaking, when it comes to the objective and design of result-based interventions, I think what we can clearly conclude from the review of the existing examples, both in the CAP strategic plans and also outside the CAP strategic plans, is that those interventions have the potential basically to target environmental services in a more holistic perspective, meaning to combine the targeting of different environmental services. So in a way to apply a kind of whole farm approach to our environmental schemes. We've seen the examples with the scorecards, for example, with the Irish and also the Portuguese examples, where different indicators for different environmental services are brought together into a payment calculation, into a scoring system. Of course, in terms of issues, that increases complexity. And also when we combine different environmental services, it's maybe not sufficient to only look at a farm, but it needs actions and basically results depend on actions that go beyond a single farm. So the additional complexity that we see here also then comes from the need for collaboration between different farms, and also a broader perspective potentially when we think about objectives in relation to water quality that would relate to implementation or interventions at a catchment level that really would need coordinated efforts of different farms along the catchment level, and also accounting for the fact that water quality within the catchment is not only impacted on by agricultural activities, and that would bring different design considerations that are important to consider. Of course, when we combine environmental services, we need to define results based on several indicators. Again, the link to the scorecards that are used to basically operationalize these kind of processes that can really be, I think, as we have seen in the examples, a useful tool to assess the results and also to bring them together in an understandable way, and to create a kind of scoring systems that's plausible and also understandable to everyone and link those to the payments. Then again, the importance of the collaborative action across beyond single farms, that's important here. That also links then to the selection of indicators. I will come to that in a minute. And the importance of integrating capacity building measures within the design of result-based interventions. The next slide, please. So that brings us to some of the lessons learned then to indicators, in relation to indicators, monitoring, reporting, and verification. And as mentioned earlier, one of the key lessons really is that beneficiaries must have ownership of the results. So this links to the involvement of farmers in the monitoring and really enabling farmers to understand the results that they produce. Pardon me. So, and that they can also then really through the involvement of the measurements of the indicators, basically receive acknowledgement of the results that received. And I think that also links back to the point made earlier in the discussion that there are farmers, I think it was in Portugal, the context, that who are quite happy to receive support through the farm visits in terms of improving the farm management. And here in particular, then with the result-based intervention, the potential motivation is to improve results and also potentially move up to higher payment levels and increase revenue from result-based interventions. We see the use of additional indicators that are not considered for payments. So basically, where also experts would collect data on additional indicators, providing a more comprehensive picture on the environmental context and impacts, and using those kind of additional indicators and additional sources of information also then to reduce the risk when main results may not be manifestable. And the important aspect on considering catchment level interventions for water quality. So really thinking about a kind of evolving indicator system with pressure indicators in the early stages of the scheme of the intervention, of the implementation. And then when there is more time and more experience gained, also in terms of ensuring good collaboration and cooperation between farmers and the catchment, that then over the longer period of time, more direct indicators could be added, measuring changes in water quality, potentially adding a kind of bonus element to the intervention. So that relates to the adaptive monitoring, reporting, and verification process. And with that, I come to my last slide. About the linking the payments to the results. Again, we touched on those kind of issues in the discussions already, that it is important to make payments sensitive to the levels of results achieved. So that on the one hand relates to ensuring additionality by really defining a minimum level of results that unlocks payments, and also to reduce the perceived risks by using different payments rates, ensuring that there are also payments received if results levels are relatively low, just to reduce the perceived risk there. And maybe an important point that we've seen in the design of the payment differentiation, I think Costas, you mentioned that earlier already, is really stimulate the ambition of targeting over time higher levels of results, basically through implementing a nonlinear increase in payment rates. And then the last point, quickly on basically exploring the potential to define payment ways that again provide an incentives to farmers to adopt result-based interventions, of course, within the WTO rules. So that could, for example, to be a top-up to basic income support for the eco schemes, or also the consideration of auctions to really estimate payments raised and to maximize the services there. Also potentially using some kind of scoring mechanism to prioritize certain areas where there is a particular high environmental benefit expected, so the different mechanisms for auctions that could be of potential relevance.